Christina, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So, give us a little introduction on your journey as a mom entrepreneur and how you have a role in the coaching industry.
I started my business before becoming a mother. So I started my business about 4 years ago. And I initially started it whenever I was working in corporate. So I was a marketing director at a law firm at the time and quickly realized that wasn't for me. And so I quit that job and I started my business. And from there, I went through the whole journey of like those early years and I was just kind of working around the clock. And then as I was able to like scale out and get a team and have some like systems in place and more streamlined, I had this like space suddenly and I kind of like came up for air. And I was actually traveling at the time and I was single. And I was just writing out my goals for the following year and just trying to figure out like what else, because it felt like life was so good. I was like, how could it be better? I just didn't really know like what's next. And it just was really clear to me that I wanted to be a mother. I've always wanted to be a mother, but I don't know, it felt clear that this was the time. So I decided to go on the journey of becoming a mother, doing it solo. And so I very quickly, gratefully, got pregnant with my daughter. And so I right away started to prep for maternity leave and all of that. And so, like, that was a whole journey that if you ever want to get into, we can do that as well, because it's so different for an entrepreneur. And so I went into all of that. And then I had my daughter last September. So she's 17 months old now.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot in that whole little intro, but I'd love to hear about what influenced your passion to start a business to help coaches amplify their message.
Yeah, so I do work mostly with coaches, so I didn't mention that. And with that, I got into the coaching industry just like personally, like started hiring coaches and things like that whenever I was in corporate. And I got really into like Brooke Castillo and like her podcast and her work, and I joined her program and things like that. And I just fell in love with coaching and what it did for me in my life. And in corporate, I was in marketing and I knew that I wanted to go out on my own. And so it was just kind of clear and easy transition to know that I was going to transition into just marketing still, like doing what I already knew how to do. And so it was just like a nice marriage between the two of helping coaches amplify that work. And I've worked with other companies and things like that. And I do just like love marketing and ads in general. But there's just something special and more exciting whenever I am doing it for a coach or something that I know is like really making an impact on people's lives. Like it makes me want to like just work longer and harder at it. Like you're just kind of like in it as much as the client. And so it was just so natural to go that direction.
Mhm. And I think when you're passionate about something as an entrepreneur, I mean, that just kind of really fuels the business because it's not easy every day.
Right.
You
Yeah, it definitely keeps
know?
you going. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I would love to hear what you think some of the biggest misconceptions that coaches, and I think you help course creators too, kind of have about marketing or using digital marketing for their programs.
So I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I think that probably the biggest one is that more exposure equally makes more sales, and it doesn't
Mhm.
quite. Like you really do have to nail down your messaging. The offer has to be good. There's also whenever we think about the offer, we think about whether the content inside of it is good or your coaching is good. And like a lot of times people are thinking of the offer as like what they're offering, right? But it's actually also how we're presenting it. It's the price point,
Mhm.
the container, the different features that it has, how it's being communicated. All of these things are a part of the offer. And sometimes when you are the coach or the expert, it's hard to see it from the other side as from what other people are looking at it as. And in the online space, I mean, as we all know, there's so much noise and it's in no way like actually saturated. It feels like it because there's so much more than maybe there was like 5 years ago,
Mhm.
but there's so much room for more coaches for sure. But there is a lot of noise, right? You really do have to break through a lot, and so much is changing all the time. So I think that the misconception is often just that if I just have more exposure, I will just make more sales. And if you're converting at least some percentage, there's some truth to that, but it really does take the groundwork of understanding the offer and the journey that people are going to from point A to point B, which would be that maybe they do know about your offer or they don't, to them actually investing with you.
Hmm. So, do you also help clients curate and craft that offer and that messaging as part of
Mhm.
what you do?
Yes. So before we did funnels and things, and then I paused those offers for a while and really focused just on ads management. Most of what we do is ads management, but we also do funnels. And with that, whenever we are auditing a funnel, the offer is a huge part of that. It's also still a bit with ads management as well. Like you're going to get consulting from me because I'm not going to run ads to something if I don't think it's, right. So I always give suggestions there. But a funnel audit is like a full on audit. We have a designer, a copywriter, like everyone's hands on deck, just going through all of it, really going through all of the copy, design, the offer itself, how you're presenting at your live launch scheduling, all of that.
Hmm. That sounds like really an intense, like deep dive into it's not like, here's my program, go market it. You do a lot of analysis, and it sounds like you have expertise or people on your team that help with the various, there's so much you need to know.
It's a lot, and
It
it
is.
happens in phases. So like you don't have to nail all of it on day
Right.
one, but like it does need to be a target as you're
Hmm.
moving through the journey for sure.
Yeah, so I love how you mentioned that. I mean, something that I often hear with whatever an entrepreneur wants to do is they automatically feel like the market they are in or want to enter into is crowded. And I think it has a lot to do with the algorithm of whatever platform you're on, because then it's just going to start feeding you all the other people doing the same thing you're doing or
Yeah, I was
similar.
just going to mention that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
like, so maybe you have some experience and can give some advice to our listeners about how maybe we can look to distinguish ourselves in what we perceive as a crowded market. Because I think no matter what
Mhm.
market you're in, you need to attempt to distinguish yourself from what everybody else is doing.
It's a great question too, because it's obviously a necessity, right? But the amazing thing about coaching industry and even course creators is whenever we have a lot of personal brands,
Hmm.
it's actually, it can be a lot easier to do because just by being yourself. Like
Hmm.
people are just going to resonate with how you communicate, whether you are really harsh or you're really warm or, just how
Right.
you describe things, all of those things and explain things, it's really going to connect with people. So
Hmm.
by putting yourself out there and just being yourself as much as you can and try not to, like you mentioned the algorithm and how it just starts to feed you all these things. You're like, everyone's a coach. Like
Yeah.
there's no one who's not a coach. And that is what it's going to feel like.
Yeah.
So whenever you are in that place of trying to figure out how do I differentiate myself, it is important to do some research and just see, what is out there, but also keep the consumption to a minimum because it is really hard to not, kind of like form into how other people are doing things. And it's easy to lose sight of your own creation when you're constantly consuming. So there's a time to consume and there's a time to create. And if you are trying to find yourself and find yourself in the market with a little bit of research, also really take a lot of time and space to create and just be yourself. I think that really, really helps, especially with personal brands, because you're going to just naturally be different from all of you're not going to be like any coach out there unless you are like trying to pretend to be, which is a problem, right? So, and really hard to uphold forever. So, really just like slowing down the consumption and just being yourself.
Oh my goodness. Yes, it is. That's such a wise tip because it's like a fire hose. It's
Yeah.
like,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so, I mean, do you have any tips on how we can do that? Do you have any tips on how you do that at yourself as an entrepreneur? Because,
Hmm.
it really is. You can get caught in this consumption loop and like you said, really lose sight of your own
Hmm.
identity and your own kind of like compass and what you want to achieve and what your talents are.
Yeah, I think one thing that this isn't a necessity, but this is something that helps me is I have a personal Instagram and a business Instagram, and I only log into my business one at certain times, and I keep that to a minimum. And there's actually times where I've had my team do all of that, and they just let me know whenever there's a DM that I need to address or something like that. But otherwise, I don't log into that one. And in my personal one, I just have friends and family and things like that. And that really helps me because I'm not getting all, the fire hose of like all the business stuff. And I will say in all honesty, it's probably a little bit easier for me because agencies aren't as like, all into content creation and stuff as much as
Mhm.
coaches are. So
Mm,
even in the business stuff, most of my feed is like other coaches and things like that. So there's less comparison. Like I don't compare myself to other coaches because I'm
right.
not a coach. So with coaches, I can't even imagine. Like I have a lot of friends. I've become really good friends with coaches and things like that. And I'm just like, I don't know how you do it. Like it's a lot, I can't imagine how difficult it would be to compare yourselves and things like that. But also one tip that I've heard, a lot of it is just stopping the scroll, like the
Right.
mindless scrolling. Like that is something I'm always dealing with. If there is something loading, taking too long to load on my computer, if my phone isn't within reach, I'm like, what am I? I'm not even thinking, I just pick it up. And so I have to put it like over somewhere else. So I don't do
Mhm.
that. But
Mhm.
there was a tip that I heard of like the last few days where a woman said that she moves the app where it is on her phone screen every week, just so
Mhm.
she's like, having to look for it. And then it like triggers this like, oh, I'm looking for Instagram or Facebook or whatever right now. And like that's kind of cool too. Some people delete it off their phone. There's
Mhm.
also like app limits and things like that. But
Yeah.
the business and personal, that does help me with the, not consuming like other content like that.
I love that. Those are great tips. And I think people can, especially when you're an online entrepreneur, you can really tend to feel like you're the only one that deals with this situation. So I love we're talking
Yeah,
about it. It's something
it's so
that,
true.
in the digital space, you're always thinking about. I mean, when you have a brick and mortar
Mhm.
business, unless you were walking by somebody else's business or something like that, you just wouldn't be bombarded with the temptation to compare or whatever.
So
So
true.
it's
Hmm.
definitely a challenge we have to deal with. But
Yeah.
I would really love to hear about some of the examples of where some of the digital marketing strategies that you've kind of put in place for your clients has helped them, have a greater impact with what they do.
Yeah. So a lot of our clients are kind of in the stage of amplifying. There are
Mhm.
times where, we do have to go in and do audits and things like that. But a lot of times those clients have also still already had some success.
Mhm.
So typically clients will come to us either like in the like lower six figure range, like 200, 300K, most likely 500K or more. So they're at that point and they're trying to get to seven figures. So that's probably our most common clients. And with that, it just takes probably around 3 to 6 months of getting the ads right along with the funnel because depending on the journey of the client, if you have mostly done organic marketing online, then as you start ads, you're putting a colder audience through. Not always, it really depends on how their organic strategy works.
Mhm.
But if before they had a lot more warmer leads going through the funnel and now they're having colder leads, sometimes we have to change up the funnel, LinkedIn it a little bit, things like that, having more nurturing and social proof and things like that. But we've taken a lot of clients from like the 500K mark to the seven figure mark and beyond. So that's probably going to be the most common path. And that's kind of where we
Mhm.
specialize in those areas right there. It's just a lot of amplifying and tweaking along the way, but a lot of the focus is amplifying.
Mhm. That's a really big jump to go from the 6 to 7 figures. And,
Mhm.
having gone, had to make the leap from 5 to 6 figures was like, that is
Yeah.
that's a lot. So, what are some of the things that your clients are maybe dealing with in just maybe even their mindset that I'm sure that you see in even thinking that they're valuable or worthy enough to go from the 6 to 7 figures?
Hmm. Yeah, I think with that place that I see a lot of clients come to me, a lot of times they actually do seem to be pretty confident, and they're really focusing on like that, 7-figure milestone is just like this like golden star,
Yeah,
right? It's like
right.
this thing. What I see whenever there's like mindset things, it's typically, or as far as like mental health, it's like a burnout stage,
Mm,
especially if they kind of just really hustled to
mm,
where they're at. And it really just depends. I feel like because I'm kind of, in the coaching world and then also in the agency world because I have an agency. So I consume both kinds of like information and advice and things like that. And whenever I consume like agency things, it's a lot of focus on team and stuff because we have to, like, we can't do all of the different parts of everything we do. I have to have a copywriter and a designer, and like those creatives are so important to the ads. It can't be also the media buyer, right? So we are, always focusing on team. And in the coaching space, there is talk about team. It's not a foreign concept, but you can go so far without a team
mm,
that I feel like it becomes more of an afterthought from what I've seen with my clients. And so I see a lot of burnout because even if they have a couple of people on their team, they're not always like super integrated. And once we start amplifying, it can get really messy. I personally have seen multiple times having clients that can't get out of bed because they've hit burnout so hard. Yeah, multiple times. It happens a lot. And I've talked about it on my own podcast before and like in content and things like that, because I don't want people to feel like they're the only ones. That like I see this a lot. It's really, really common. And I think some of it might be because we just talk about team less in the coaching space when we were talking about growing the business and, just the importance of that. But also, the time frame that I'm jumping into a
mhm.
coaching business is when they're trying to amplify.
Right.
And when we start amplifying and running numbers through, like running
Mhm.
leads through, it reveals all these problems and these holes in
Yeah.
the business. And so it can get very chaotic. So from a mental health standpoint, that's usually what I see is actually the burnout the
Mm.
most.
That's a really great point. I mean, I know that even like Amy Porterfield put her coaching program on hold because she had an analysis done that her team couldn't have handled
Hmm.
the, amplification, the additional work. So, I mean, that's a great point that if you're at a stage where you want to amplify, definitely making sure that your team and yourself, you can handle it.
Yes.
So,
Hmm.
I'm curious about a couple more things in that do you work with creators that use any platforms for their specific platforms or just basically any platform for their programs?
Yeah, the most common is definitely Kajabi or Kartra. Those are the main ones. I will say for payment processing, Thrivecart is also really common and a really good one. It's so affordable. Like I
Mhm.
don't know how they make money like with the one time.
The
How is this
masses.
possible? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy, but Kartra's a really good one. But if you want something that's all in one, definitely Kartra and Kajabi. They're very comparable. Kajabi's slightly more expensive, but both of those are definitely hands down the most common.
And then two, do you work with people who are in like kind of the launch cycle or trying to go evergreen or both?
Yes. So we do, that will be mostly with like funnel work. So we
Mhm.
do new funnel builds. So
Mhm.
that's typically what that kind of client is going after. And then for evergreen, that it can also be ads as well. So if someone's switching from live launching to evergreen,
Mhm.
typically when they're switching from live launching to evergreen, they are still actually going to live launch, but they just have
Mhm.
it on evergreen in between the live launches.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there is this whole world, and I love this conversation because if somebody wants to know more about, amplifying their program or their course, there are people out there that know how to help you do that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it seems like you just hear so much about how to create the programs or the
Mhm.
courses and not necessarily somebody who can help you expand that. So, that's
Yeah, it's true.
awesome.
And it's also a thing where sometimes whenever I see coaches hit this place where they've been making the same amount of money for so long and they feel like kind of like they've plateaued or something, and a lot of them create a new offer
Mhm,
when really they have this thing that works and they have a funnel that is converting and it's working. So really, if we just amplify this one thing before you start spreading out, that's a really clear path to, hitting whatever goals you have as far as revenue or impact and things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that that is so tempting from any creator standpoint is there's like this pressure to constantly create, and we can't possibly imagine that what we created a while ago is still, even though it might be
Mhm.
working, that that's something we should put our energy into instead of creating more new things.
Yeah, it feels like far too simple to
Right.
just
It seems
keep working at this,
counterintuitive.
yeah, this one thing. Yeah, mhm,
Right.
that's true.
Yeah. So let's talk about you being a single mom. I mean, that is such a unique perspective, and it's something that you chose. It
Mhm.
sounds like that it's just something you were called to do. And then, so how has motherhood changed your approach to being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I feel like I was pretty good at handing things off before and just being really good at delegating. With my clients, I'm still the point of contact,
Mhm.
but my team takes care of a lot of the other things so that I'm able to do that. So I pretty much like other than obviously running the business and like, managing and things like that, I run ads. Like I'm a media buyer and I, do client calls and strategy and that's what I love to do. And
Mhm.
so, whenever I got pregnant, it was like I felt like things were so like good and like streamlined and super
Mhm.
tight, but it's like whenever you're forced to make it even tighter, you're like, wow, like there's so much actually, all these opportunities to make it even better. So being a mother, it just kind of had that fire under me to make things even more like just solid and because it's really a lot about not just time but like mental capacity to be able to like I
Yeah.
can't have things floating around in my brain, so
Yeah.
it has to be systemized. Everything's got to fit into some sort of system so that it can
Mhm.
operate like efficiently. And that also prevents us from having to deal with mistakes or things getting missed or anything like that because it's pretty foolproof. So it's not up to like, things just kind of floating around. So that has been probably the biggest thing is just being even better at delegating because I absolutely can't do everything.
Mhm.
And also just keeping things tighter and just more systemized and streamlined so that we have that mental capacity open.
Mhm. Yeah, and I don't know, do you feel like being an entrepreneur fits better with motherhood than maybe working a corporate job did?
Absolutely. I can't, I have no experience working in corporate and being a mother, and I
Yeah.
can't imagine it because I do have obviously a lot of flexibility and stuff with my time. And so while my daughter is at daycare, I can get a lot of things done, like personally. And even just between calls, I can prep dinner really fast or like all these things that are such luxuries. And so whenever I pick her up, everything is finished, like everything's clean, dinner's already cooked, all of these things so that I can just like spend time with her. And I'm very, very grateful to have
Mhm.
that. So I can't imagine it any other way. The other downfall is that, if there's problems or anything like that, like it's really stressful. There's no like clocking out per se, like you are on all the time. I didn't really get like a proper maternity leave, like you're not off, or anything like that. So there are some trade-offs, but yeah, I mean, I absolutely love it and it really works for us.
Yeah. So, do you have any other tips for moms listening who need help making it work and taking care of themselves in the process of trying to run their business and being a mom?
Yeah, it is quite the juggle. And I think that now my daughter is a little bit older. She's very, obviously, very dependent on me still. But I mean, it is like way easier. When she was like a baby, that was when it was really, really difficult to juggle. And everything, what worked for me the most, just like in business, but also systemizing my personal life.
Yeah.
Like, it's not glamorous at all, but like just having a system for everything has really, really helped me. And like, meal delivery service, I've gone back and forth with that too. I sometimes like life is just too crazy and I cook Unity is my favorite and
Mhm.
it's quite expensive, but it is so nice to have all of your meals cooked. And that can be really helpful. And just like leaning on like little services like that and
Mhm.
things like that. But also for me, it's been a lot of time management. because just making sure that whenever I'm working, I am working and I'm focused,
Mm.
which is why I was saying I have to have the phone on the other side of the room and things like that, because these little habits can kind of creep in and you can go in little rabbit holes and things. And so just staying really, really focused, and also time blocking on my calendar to just stay on track. And that includes rest time too. If it's something like I want to just relax on the couch for an afternoon, or I'm going to take a nap at this time, like when my daughter wasn't sleeping, I blocked out naps in my day, and I just, stuck to that. That was how I could make sure everything got in. I just had to follow my schedule.
Yeah. No, those are great tips. And I love that you mentioned the the mental part of keeping organized and systems, because we just don't think, we just focus on our time so much and not our mental energy, and
Hmm.
how tasks can just drain us sometimes. But so I think that those are great tips for anybody listening who wants to, we're constantly reiterating and trying to
Yes.
manage it as our children grow and their nap times change or their
Yeah.
schedule changes. So I would love to hear any takeaway that you have for listeners that you want to stick with them from our conversation.
From a business standpoint or like motherhood standpoint?
Either one. Yeah, it doesn't have to be just one, just something that you
Hmm.
would just really like to, for them to just think about or to stick with them from the
Hmm.
conversation.
Yeah, I think just overall for the business and personal, really, just really focusing on and prioritizing the mental health aspect, because I've seen that hurt so many businesses, because obviously things aren't moving when you're not getting out of bed even. And whenever, for coaches, when it's a personal brand and like you are the business, your health and well-being is so important. And then obviously as mothers, like you're what upholds your family and keeps it
Mhm.
together and keeps it going. And that's obviously huge and so important. And it's really difficult to do, right? To
Mhm.
prioritize your health, because like we have to feed the babies. So we have to,
Right.
answer these clients. Like these things have to happen. And
Mhm.
so it can feel impossible. And I've definitely had many days where I'm like, it's impossible for me
Right.
to focus on myself. Like I've felt that
Right.
so much, but it's not true. We can, it might be in small ways, it's going to look different, things like that. But really focusing on that, the rest of it seems to fall in place after that.
Mhm.
But without it, nothing seems to really fall in place the way that we want
Yes.
it. So.
Yes, I know. It's such a great reminder because we can just keep on the treadmill of serving everybody else
Mhm.
with an empty cup. And then, that burnout that you talked about, it's going to happen one way or
Yeah.
another.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it has been so wonderful learning about your insights and your wisdom into the digital marketing space for coaches and creators. Where can listeners connect with you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm on Instagram at Christina D. Bernhard. And then you can always go to my website, ChristinaBernhard.com. Everything is there, ways to contact me, more about me, and more about our services as well.
Awesome. And then did you mention a podcast?
Oh, yes, I do have a podcast. It's
Okay.
on pause right now, so it's on top of mind. But
That's
yeah, it's called
okay.
Scaling to Freedom is the
Oh,
podcast.
nice. Okay, great. I'll
Yeah.
definitely leave links to that if you'd like me to too.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about ads and funnels. It's all like focused on coaches. And then also I do have some stuff on there about maternity leave and single mom stuff too. So like it's fun over there.
Nice. I so appreciate your insight and your unique perspective to motherhood and the fact that you chose to be a single mom. And that's just very brave. And
Yeah.
I feel like,
Thank you.
as a former military spouse who had to be a single mom, at times it's just
Mhm.
like, it's a lot.
It's
So
brutal. Yeah.
kudos to you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Christina, so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.